What was the worst pain you ever experienced and how did it happen? Stitches without anesthetics. Happened twice. First time was when I was 5 or 6 and my brother thought it would be funny to push me into the pool. As I fell in, I slammed my chin on the edge of the pool which caused me to bite my tongue nearly off. Since it happened shortly before my parents had to go to a back to school night thing for my brother, they swung by my dentist's office with me. My dad was friends with him and got my stitches done there because it would be faster than going to the ER and it was on the way to my brother's school. It was pretty awesome eating popsicles, ice cream, and pudding for the entire week though. I remember running around my brother's back to school night with a popsicle in hand telling other kids the awesome news. Second time, ripped my big toe open at the joint of it. I was bleeding a river of blood down the front steps. It looked like a homicide scene. When my dad came back from work, he's a doctor. Since he had just gotten off work and was super hungry, he didn't want to go back to the hospital for stitches despite my mom begging him to and did the stitches in the kitchen. My mom wanted to give me booze so I could be drunk and not feel anything but my dad didn't want to wait for it to take effect and just went right at it. The feeling of a hooked, thick needle piercing through a thick callus with no painkillers is not a feeling that is easily forgotten. I nearly blacked out from the pain. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but your parents are kind of buttholes. Riding a bike head first into the side of a van. So I was in year 7 in school UK age 11. And as you can probably guess I used to ride my bike when I couldn't get money for the bus. It was about a 15-minute journey with quite a few hills and the abuse I got from my classmates ensured that I now have a hatred for cycling. Anyway, when I got to the end of the road quite close to the school I pulled on the brakes and nothing happened. Luckily I was going quite slowly so it didn't really matter and after a brief inspection the brakes starting working again so I promptly removed the issue from my mind. Now my school was built on a small, yet quite steep, hill itself so the normal entrance was at the top with the reception and Bikesh at the bottom. This meant that I had to go down a steep hill of a length I'd approximate to be 100 meters, or 110 yards, with dodgy brakes. You can probably see where this is going. As I started the descent, a white van pulled out from the reception, so I pulled on the brakes. Once again nothing happened. Obviously at this point I knew I was going to be in a world of pain no matter what I did. The hill continued beyond the reception into a brick wall, so I made the split-second decision that going into the side of the van was probably the wisest decision to make, since the further I went before I stopped the quicker I'd be going, and duly let out a yell to alert any passers-by of my plight. I don't really remember going into the side of the van but I do remember being on the floor with an increasing dull pain on the side of my face. I was wearing a helmet that took the brunt of the force so I didn't cave my skull in but I was placed in a brace and forced to lie down on a stiff board for way too long. If there is any lesson to take from this it is to always wear a helmet. It basically spilt along the right side and I shudder to think what state I would be in if that had occurred to the side of my head. The funny thing is that the time I was quite annoyed because I had no visual impairments within a day, despite being in pretty bad pain. So I couldn't go back into school with anything to show for the exercise. Henceforth I was known as that kid who rode into the side of a van. I was trying to impress my brother a couple years ago with a neat beer bottle trick he couldn't do. Unfortunately, I did it wrong and smashed the bottle in my hand, causing a 2-inch C-shaped cut in the palm of my hand. That part wasn't too painful but I did nearly pass out on the way to infirmary with a blood-soaked kitchen cloth wrapped around my hand. I got an x-ray and showed I had a couple of pieces of glass stuck in my hand. What the nurse then did pisses me off every time I think about it. She got 2 sets of decent sized tweezers and peeled back the C-shaped cut in my hand and with the second set started scratching around inside my hand pulling out the glass. As I was a rugby player I've always told myself not to complain about any pain so I stayed quiet as this woman tortured me. That was until I got complete tunnel vision and was seconds from passing out. I let the nurse know at which point she nonchalantly said she would get a local anesthetic to get rid of the pain. I had just endured easily the most pain I have ever been in for minutes on end when I could have avoided it all with the injection she gave me when it was more or less over. First true heartbreak is pretty brutal. As far as emotional pain. Physical pain? Well, right now I have a broken wrist, 1 clean break, 2 fractures, chipped bone, slightly torn ligament, and nerve damage in my thumb. Probably the most pain I've been in, and prolonged, too. How did it happen? Slipped on wet paint at a nightclub at 5 AM and fell down 2 steps, landing with my arm behind my back and my body weight landing on it wedged between my back and the top of a step. It was a UV paint party and the owner had no safety rubber mats down or anything. Fantastic. Cluster headaches are a B. Basically they occur in a very specific part of the head and they appear for a few hours then dissipate, and when you finally think it's over it comes back only worse. I had these last over 12 hours once. I thought I was going insane. Also sometimes when I drink alcohol I get a severe stabbing pain in my gut. It feels like someone sticking a knife in you and twisting it. No matter what I do I can't make it feel any better. I always have to lay down on my bed and just squirm until it eventually goes away, usually after about 15 minutes. I broke 3 ribs in my back, then took pain pills for a few days and became massively constipated. When the time for the epic birthing came, trying to push it out with busted ribs was probably the worst pain I've ever felt. Abscessed tooth. I didn't take care of it fast enough. Pain was everywhere, all over my face, and a deep pain. I couldn't sleep, eat, or think. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I'm still unsure how I got it in the first place. Having a big chunk of road rash on my back cleaned up by a nurse so it could be dressed properly. I had to lay on my front while she went at it with some kind of medical sponge. She offered gas and air but I declined as I thought I could cope. There was about 10 minutes of real, whole body spasm type of pain but I kept it together with a few grunts and a very firm grip on the end of the bed, and to be honest I was a bit pleased with myself for getting through it. I was very wrong. Okay, that's the edges cleaned up. Now I need to get onto the deep bit, about 1.5 to 2 times the size of my palm on my lower back. Now there's a lot of dirt embedded in here so I'm going to have to really scrub this bit. Are you sure you don't want gas and air? I was an idiot and said no. The pain went straight from a 9 to about 16 and I lasted 15 seconds before giving in. The weird thing about gas and air is that you can still feel everything. You just don't care about it, which was a bizarre experience. It took her 20 minutes of scrubbing so hard it was rocking my whole body and the whole of my back felt like it was on fire throughout. There was no way in heck I'd have been able to handle it without the gas. Burns. I accidentally left a pan of peanut oil on the stove and it caught fire. I couldn't get close enough to it to cover it with a damp cloth so I used a powder fire extinguisher instead. The jet of powder caused boiling oil to blow back over me, spattering my face, my arms and dropping down onto my feet. The pain was just incredible. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital I had gas and air which did nothing to alleviate it. At the hospital I had intravenous paracetamol, oral codeine and ibuprofen suppository all at once which did reduce it. The burns to my arm were the worst and the scars remain, but fortunately I didn't need a skin graft as a result of very careful wound management. I hope I'll never experience pain like it again. Having a 7.62 caliber bullet tear into my arm, bounce off my bone, then go back out taking a large piece of forearm muscle with it. Worst pain I've ever experienced actually happened this past week. I have a very high pain tolerance. Wisdom teeth with dry sockets. It hurt a little. Kidney infection for 2 months because it didn't hurt enough to go to the doctor until I started convulsiving as sepsis set in. Ovarian cyst burst and I was bleeding internally. Worked until 4 PM when it happened at 7:30 AM. This past Friday, I literally found myself considering that if I shot myself in the freaking head, the pain I was in would subside. Not because I'd be dead but because the pressure in my head would be able to escape. I dug my nails into my skull so hard, I bled. Morphine, Dilaudid, Percocet, nothing touched it. 2 hours and 2 nights in the hospital. 5 freaking days of not being able to sit in a dark, quiet room without sunglasses and earplugs. Freaking migraines, man. It's a whole different game when your brain is being attacked directly. Had a heart attack in 2005. The pain. Have had accidents, fractures, tooth extraction, nasty injuries, but that pain, it is horrible. A severe UT. I went home feeling a bit ill and I had a sore tummy. I was quite uncomfortable and couldn't really sit still. I decided I must have had a full bladder. So I go to have a wee and the most excruciating, Searing hot pain ripped through me. I was passing blood and blood clots for several hours. Definitely one of the worst pains ever. UTIs are a B. I describe them as the feeling of a knife being shoved up my dong hole while I pee. That and the constant urge to pee. But when you do, only a couple bloody drops come out and that burning stinging pain happens all over again. Had a dirt bike crash where I had to turn my bike over and roll down the dirt road several times, thoroughly scratching and cutting my entire torso. Nothing serious but just tons of cuts and such. Got back home probably 4 hours later, still able to ride and all that, and my dad decided it needed cleaning, so he had me wrap a towel around my waist and proceeded to pour rubbing alcohol down my front, back and sides. I have never been so unable to hold back tears. I imagine it's the pain of being on fire, because there is just an infinite and unstoppable amount of pain of every nerve in your upper body. I was sure I was going to bite a hole through the towel I had in my mouth. I have two pains that are tied up for worst and still affect me today. One being me out on a run with my dog. She was a healer. I would sometimes go off trail as a way to mess with her. Well, one day she was starting to lag behind and I wanted to get her to hurry up, so I started to veer off trail, but I slipped on the rubble and braced myself using my forearms. Well, a rock got lodged in there and I ended up having to dig it out of my arm. The other time being when I was longboarding. I was going at pace with the cars, where the speed limit is 35, so maybe 40 miles per hour. Then I hit some sand left over from the night before's storm, which trapped my board and sent me flying about 15 feet. Well, I body slammed and ended up tearing about 5 inches of skin off of my arms. My left arm still is numb where the skin was almost completely torn off, and my right arm just likes to constantly hurt. I woke up after surgery drifting in and out of consciousness with a cast on my leg. I swore my swollen leg was too big for the cast as the pressure would kill me, but no one would listen. Man, it hurt. An animal hair in the urethra. You know how firm an animal hair is? I swear it was lodged into my inner lining. I couldn't walk without a burning sensation that struck my inner being. Later that day when I got home, I had to dig that sucker out. Lesson learned. Don't masturbate with socks. Appendix burst and I didn't know it. I just thought I had really bad stomach aches, but it felt like knives were being moved around in my stomach. When I got to the hospital, the doctor said that if I had waited 2 more hours to go to the hospital, I would have been dead. I attempted to ride a snowboard off the roof of a shed. I completely fricked it up and came down straight on my butt. I felt a shockwave ripple through my entire body and fell back. My friend roommate tore off my bindings and I somehow staggered into the house while clutching my back. I then writhed around on the bed for the next 4 hours trying to find a spot that didn't hurt. I finally realized the only spot was in a sitting position, but if I elevated my butt off the bed by stretching my arms. I sat like that for a good day and a half before finally rolling over onto my stomach, where I slept for another day and a half. I then crawled through the house, poured an incredibly hot tub and sat in it for a couple hours. I was able to walk again, but really slowly. I spent the next 2 months or longer walking really slowly whenever I went out, clutching my back. That was over 20 years ago. I got into a car accident last year, was rear-ended. My back ended up hurting. Kind of duller than the original pain, but in the same spot. So I scheduled X-ray MRI. The technician actually yelled "what the frick" from inside his little viewing room, then asked me if I'd hurt my back before. So I told him yay in college. He rushed it to the chiropractor and told me to leave if the chiropractor didn't have a long conversation with me. Turns out I have a 50% compression fracture in one of the vertebrae of my spine. It should have fricked up my ability to walk, but I grew the size strength of surrounding muscle way more than it's intended to. There's a moderate chance that when I get old that muscle will give out and I'll either need some steel rods put in my back or a walker or both. Or maybe I'll just keep my mutant back muscles. I had no idea what a compression fracture was until the chiropractor showed me those rays. If every vertebrae looks like a marshmallow, I have one in the middle of my back that looks like someone grabbed it by the left side and squished it nearly flat. I've broken countless bones in my life. Like, I've literally lost count of how many times I've broken a bone, but I always assumed a break was a crack or snap. So you put a cast on and it heals. It never occurred to me that you can break a bone by squishing it really hard and that it basically stays like that. When I was bringing my 4-year-old daughter a tray with hot tea and a sharp kitchen knife to cut the sandwich, I put the tray on the table, cut the sandwich. When I walked back to the kitchen I stepped on a Lego. There were a couple of other ways that could have gone. Cluster headaches. I had a week-long episode around 2 years ago. Some doctors call it the most painful human condition known of. It's like having a hot spike rammed through your eye every 3 hours. I was in and out of the hospital the whole time and I have a very foggy memory of the entire thing. My parents were told to keep a close eye on me out of fear of suicide attempts. I would not wish it upon my worst enemy. Double ear inflection. Not only was I rendered deaf, there was a throbbing pain that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Sleeping became its own nightmare when I unintentionally rolled over on the pillow and sent a jolt of pain down my neck, plus the itchiness. So itchy. Then when you proceed to scratch inside, your eardrum starts screaming. Worst pain? Wisdom teeth. They're still coming in. I've removed most of one currently and have removed 2 previously myself using vice grips, pliers and a screwdriver and hammer combo. Tooth pain is a special kind of pain. There is nothing akin to it. Broken bones? Had M. No problem. Gout? Been there. Changed my diet to avoid it, but if needles were the fix I'd be living in Gout City. Some people feel tooth pain worse than others. My mother said to me in no uncertain terms that she would sooner give birth to a child than to suffer tooth pain again. Not only her, but several adult women have told me that. I've been told by a man that he'd take passing kidney stones again over having wisdom tooth pain. How did it happen? A youth of drinking soda and completely ignoring oral hygiene. I have such an extreme fear of needles and being put to sleep for dental work that my lack of money for either procedure is a moot point. Brush your teeth daily. Floss daily. Take care of your teeth. Go to a dentist. Seriously. 9 spinal taps in a row after a stroke in my brainstem. I pray no one has to suffer through that in their life. Even my worst enemy. Had an ember the size of a pea fall between my leatherwork glove and my hand. I was carrying something and couldn't brush it off or anything, so I just put it out with my skin. Snapped 2 of my teeth in half and exposed all the nerves while jet skiing once. Came down hard off a wave and smashed my face into the handlebars. My mouth was so full of blood that keeping it closed to stop air from coming into contact with the nerves was impossible. To this day, have never been even close to the amount of pain. I got a concussion from a car accident. Didn't realize it at the time, but about 10-12 hours later I had the most evil, rage-inducing, brain-splitting headache I could ever imagine. Let me see here. 34 kV jolt? Nope, not that bad. 450 VDC. That's DC volts. Jolt? Okay, not pleasant. 800 degree F. Soldering iron sticking to your skin. Smells tasty. Splinter under fingernails. Ow. Severe herniation of L4/L5 lumbar disc. Winner chicken dinner. About 2 years ago while working, I began suffering minor back issues. I complained to the boss, who held the theory of I was just a lazy punk kid who didn't want to work, so my statements about just how bad my back hurt went ignored. I didn't really want to get fired from the job. It sucked, but it was money. For 3 months I bitched about my back, and he kept telling me to shut up and get to work. This was no longer an option one day. I couldn't get back to work because all the pain suddenly went away, along with my right leg. Then the few moments of numbness were replaced by the most god-awful pain I had ever experienced. I found out my L4/L5 lumbar disc had essentially blown out. What is usually an annular tear with a little leakage. Well, you remember that episode of Simpsons where the Karate Guy talks about popping Homer's discs like bubble wrap? Well, that's what happened to my spine, and I now had disc goo applying pressure to the lower part of my spine as well as completely cutting off my sciatic nerve. 3 months of being bedridden combined with some of the most powerful opiate painkillers they could legally prescribe me, and all those did was leave me not wanting to take my own life from the pain. However, for a solid week it was 24 hours of the most severe pain I'd ever gone through. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. All I could actually do is lay there and cry. It's the kind of pain where if cutting my leg off would have helped, they could have taken it. And to go along with all these constipation stories, I was apparently only a few away from having the nerves that control my sphincter muscle being pinched, meaning immediate loss of bowel control and emergency surgery. You'd think the opiates would have made me constipated, but no, they didn't. Oh well, the disc did heal itself, slowly, and it was a year before I could walk again. I still have a lot of residual pain at times, and most of my right leg is just a mass of flesh and bone that barely holds me up. The muscles are now atrophied and long useless. I can't really feel my right foot either. A gallbladder attack. It's the one and only time that has happened, knock on wood, and it was the worst pain I've ever been in. I was literally screaming from it. I was vomiting and had the worst diarrhea at the same time. I was stuck in the bathroom for 3 hours sobbing and moaning till my mom came and took me in urgent care. They did jack crap, assuming I was drug seeking, and offered some anti-nausea medication. The pain was worse than when I had my tonsils and uvula removed last year. I was 7 or 8 years old at the time. I had fallen backwards in a chair and sliced my forehead open down to the skull. Immediately taken to a hospital and was administered some local anesthetic. The doctors knew something was wrong when I started screaming bloody murder when they put the needle in for stitches. Apparently my body rejected the anesthesia, so they decided to keep going anyway. Piece of crap move. Had to have nurses hold my limbs down, and my mom said my screams were the worst thing she ever heard. 13 stitches and a massive ice cream sundae later, I was chilling. Kids bounce right back, I guess. Being stung by a scorpion. Think worst bee sting in your life while simultaneously being tased, and you are close to what it feels like. Living in a rural part of Arizona, it has unfortunately happened to me several times throughout my life. Food poisoning. Bad chicken burrito. Spent 20 hours straight in the fetal position next to a toilet. Strained my back from the constant tension. Stopped sweating like I had heat exhaustion about halfway through. Burst a few capillaries in my eyes. Toothache. It sounds like something a child might get, like a tummy ache, which isn't very bad. But this was the worst pain I've ever felt by far. I normally have a pretty high tolerance for pain, but this was just too much. I couldn't see a dentist for a full day and came very close to killing myself just to end it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.